My name is Nora Voss, and I am 27 years old. 6 days ago, my mother called me at 8:14 in the morning, which she never does, because she knows I am already at my desk by 8:14, and she has never once cared what my desk looks like. She asked if I could help smooth something over before Camille's engagement dinner on Saturday. Smooth something over. That is the phrase my family uses when they mean pay for something. I said I would think about it. What I did not say was that I had already spent 11 days quietly reading a stack of documents with my sister's name, my name, and a signature that was supposed to be mine but was not written by my hand. 3 of those documents had a notary stamp on them. One of those documents had a bank's letterhead. And one of those documents, if I was right about what it meant, was going to end my parents' Saturday, a full 7 hours before the caterer even unloaded the truck. My mother thinks Saturday is about a ring. I think Saturday is about a debt nobody in my family thought I'd ever be qualified enough to notice. Here's the part that's hard to admit. I let them believe that for almost 8 years. Welcome back to Calm Karma Stories, where ordinary people face impossible family moments and walk out with their dignity intact. If you've ever been the one who fixes things, who pays quietly, who gets thanked with a to-do list instead of a thank you, this story is for you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And please, take a second to subscribe, because what happens at the end of this one is worth staying for. But let me back up. Years before Saturday. Years before the folder, the notary stamp, or the phone call I made from a parking lot with my hands completely steady. I need you to understand what I do for a living, because it matters for everything that comes after. I am a title examiner. I work for a real estate law firm in Chicago on the 17th floor of a building that smells like new carpet and old coffee, and my entire job is reading documents that other people assume nobody will ever read closely. Deeds, liens, powers of attorney, notary logs, chain of title going back sometimes 80, 90 years. I look at a signature and I can tell you, most of the time, within about 4 seconds, whether it was signed by the person whose name is printed under it or by someone in a hurry who was hoping nobody like me would ever look. It is not a glamorous skill. Nobody puts it on a dating profile. But it is the reason my family's Saturday did not go the way they planned. And it is the reason I am telling you this story with a steady voice instead of a shaking one. I have one small habit that has followed me since college, and it's going to come up more than once, so I'll tell you now. I carry a document folio. Not a purse, not a laptop bag. A slim, dark, brown leather folio, cracked at the corners, that I bought with my first paycheck out of school for $41 at a discount office store because I could not afford the $90 one I actually wanted. I keep everything important in it, not digital. Paper. My coworkers tease me about it. My mother has called it that ugly folder more times than I can count. I have carried that folio to 4 apartments, 2 jobs, 1 hospital waiting room, and, as of last Tuesday, 1 notary's office, where a very tired woman behind a desk confirmed something I had already suspected and did not want to be right about. Now, who am I in my family? That's the next thing you need to know. I am the older daughter. My sister Camille is 2 years younger than me, and from the time we were small, there was never any real question about which one of us was the easy one. Camille was golden in the specific way that made adults soften their voices around her. She was pretty in photographs. She cried at the right moments. She had a way of standing next to my parents at events that made people assume she was the one who'd accomplished something, even when it was me holding the certificate. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it because it's true, and because it matters for what happened when we were 18 and 20. My parents, Walter and Denise Voss, have one phrase they have used on both of us our entire lives, but almost always on me. We take care of our own. I want you to remember that phrase because you're going to hear it again and again. It is the sentence my family reaches for whenever they need me to do something that costs me money, time, or dignity, and they need it to sound like love instead of a bill. I heard it for the first time that I really understood the summer I turned 19. Camille was about to turn 18, and that is where this story actually begins. I was a sophomore at a state university 2 hours from home, studying accounting on a schedule that left almost no room for error. I worked 11 hours a week at the campus library to cover books and incidentals. Tuition itself was supposed to come from a fund my parents had set up when I was born. a custodial education account, the kind where the parents are legal custodians until the child turns a certain age or finishes school, but the money is meant for one purpose only. Mine had been funded slowly over 18 years by my grandmother, my mother's mother, a woman named Ellery who believed, in her own quiet way, that an education was the one inheritance nobody could ever take back from you. She was wrong about that. But I didn't know it yet. That spring, my mother started asking odd little questions on our phone calls. How was the account doing? Had I looked at the statements lately? Did I know the login? I said no, because I didn't. My parents had always handled it, and I was 19, and it did not occur to me that handling it could mean something other than paying my tuition bill twice a year like clockwork. I want to be honest with you. At the time, I didn't think anything of those questions at all. I was buried in exams. I was the fixer even then, just in smaller ways. The one who remembered to renew the car insurance, the one who called to check on my grandmother, the one who reminded my mother about my father's blood pressure medication. I didn't have room in my head to wonder why my own tuition account was suddenly a topic of conversation. Here's the part that's hard to admit. I should have wondered. In May, Camille turned 17 and started talking about her 18th birthday, the way some people talk about a wedding. She wanted a party at a private event space downtown, the kind with a rooftop and a hired photographer and a band instead of a playlist. My mother started calling it Camille's Golden Year out loud, in front of people, at church, at the grocery store, like it was an official title. I remember sitting at the kitchen table that June, home for a long weekend, listening to my mother describe a guest list of 90 people and doing the math in my head without meaning to. Venue, catering, a live band, a custom dress, professional photography and video. I didn't say the number out loud. I didn't have to. My father said it for her, proudly, like it was an accomplishment, $42,000. I asked, carefully, where that kind of money was coming from. My mother looked at me across the table and said, "We take care of our own, Nora. You'll understand when it's your turn." I want you to sit with that sentence for a second, the way I had to sit with it in that kitchen. When it's your turn. As if a $42,000 party was a birthright that would eventually rotate to me, like a family heirloom, instead of a number that was about to come directly out of a place it should never have come from. I went back to school that August and didn't think much more about it. Camille's party happened in September. I flew back for it on a Friday afternoon, sat in a middle seat between two strangers, and changed into a dress in a gas station bathroom 40 minutes from the venue because I hadn't had time to go home first. The venue itself was on the top floor of a converted warehouse downtown, all exposed brick and enormous windows, with a 15-foot floral arch framing the entrance and an ice sculpture near the dessert table carved into the shape of the number 18, already beginning to weep small rivulets of water onto a mirrored tray by the time I arrived. A band played covers of songs Camille liked. String lights crossed the ceiling in careful diagonal rows that had clearly taken someone hours to hang. It was, by every outward measure, a beautiful night, and I want to be honest that some part of me, standing there in my gas station bathroom dress, genuinely enjoyed watching my sister glow the way she glowed that evening. My sister cried happy tears when she opened a small velvet box from my parents that turned out to contain the keys to a car. Parked, I later learned, directly outside the venue's front entrance so everyone could walk past it on their way in. I clapped along with everyone else. I hugged her. I told her she deserved every bit of it, and in that moment, I meant it, because I still believed the money for all of it had come from somewhere ordinary. Savings, a bonus, a loan my parents intended to pay back themselves. I did not know yet what that car, that ice sculpture, that dress, and that arch had actually cost me 3 weeks earlier on a date I hadn't even known to watch for. I found out in October. I was sitting in my dorm room with my roommate's space heater humming in the corner, the window cracked open an inch because the heater made the room too warm otherwise, and a mug of instant coffee going cold on the desk beside my laptop. It was a Tuesday, close to 11 at night, the kind of late semester evening where the dorm hallway outside is loud with other people's television shows, and someone 2 doors down is always practicing an instrument badly. I logged into the student portal to check my fall balance, expecting to see the usual 0, the number I'd seen every semester since freshman year without a second thought. Instead, I saw a hold on my account, a financial hold, the kind that keeps you from registering for spring classes, the kind that shows up in red letters at the top of the page like a warning label. My tuition for the fall semester had not been paid, not partially paid, not late, unpaid, in full, with a note that said my account was 90 days past due. I called my mother, confused, thinking it had to be some kind of clerical mix-up. She was quiet on the phone for a second longer than felt normal. Then she said, "We had to make some adjustments this year, Nora. Camille's birthday ended up costing more than we planned for, and the education fund was just sitting there. We'll figure out your semester. You're resourceful. You're resourceful." That was the whole explanation. Not an apology, not a plan. A compliment dressed up to sound like it solved something. I asked how much had been taken. She hesitated and then told me the fund had been almost completely drained. Every dollar my grandmother had spent 18 years quietly setting aside for my education had gone toward tables, chairs, a band, a photographer, a car, and an ice sculpture shaped like a number that was never mine. I did not scream. I want to be clear about that, because I know some of you are picturing me screaming into a dorm room phone, and that is not who I am, and it is not who I was even at 19. I sat very still on my extra-long twin bed, and I asked one question. "When did you take the money out?" She told me, September 3rd. Camille's party was September 21st. I didn't say anything else on that call. I hung up, and I opened a blank document on my laptop, and I wrote down the date, September 3rd, and next to it, I wrote the words, "before the party." I didn't fully understand yet why that detail mattered so much to me. I just knew that it did. It would take me almost 8 more years and one very specific afternoon in a notary's office to understand exactly how much it mattered. That semester, I took out my first student loan. I picked up a second job at a campus coffee shop, opening shifts at 5 in the morning, 3 days a week, on top of the library job and a full course load. I finished my degree a semester late because I had to drop to part-time for one term to afford it. My parents never brought up the money again unless I did, and when I did, the answer was always some version of the same sentence. "We take care of our own. You'll understand when it's your turn," as if my turn was some far-off, guaranteed thing, instead of a debt with my name already quietly written into it. I graduated with just under $31,000 in loans that did not need to exist. My sister graduated high school the following spring with a car, a savings cushion my parents had somehow rebuilt for her by then, and a photo album from a party that, on paper, I had paid for. I want to tell you about the years between, briefly, because they matter more than they might seem to at first. The pattern did not stop with my tuition. It just got smaller and quieter and easier for everyone but me to forget. The spring after Camille's birthday, my mother called to ask if I could help out with a $500 deposit on Camille's prom dress, since, as she put it, things were a little tight after the party. I was working 2 jobs and eating cereal for dinner more nights than I want to admit, but I sent it, because refusing felt, at the time, like it would cost me more than the money did. The following winter, Camille's car needed a transmission repair, and I got a similar call, a similar phrase. "We take care of our own, and you're doing so well, Nora. We knew we could count on you." I rode my bike to my 5 a.m. coffee shop shift in February that year because I couldn't justify fixing my own car's heater on top of everything else. I never told them that part. I don't think it would have changed anything if I had. There was a third time, too, the summer before my senior year, when Camille wanted to go on a school trip to Europe with her graduating class, and my parents were a little short after the car repair and the prom dress deposit had already stretched them thin. I had just gotten my first paycheck from a summer internship, money I'd been planning to put toward my last semester's books, and I sent $600 of it without being asked directly, because by then I had learned to anticipate the phrase before my mother even said it, the way you learn to duck before a low doorway you've hit your head on one too many times. Each time, the ask was smaller than the last one, and each time, I told myself it was the last time. It never was. What I started doing instead, without fully realizing it was the beginning of a habit that would define the rest of this story, was keeping a folder. Not a plan, not yet a strategy. Just a plain manila folder at first, before I upgraded to the leather folio, where I put a copy of every receipt, every bank transfer, every text message where my mother asked me for money using some version of that same sentence. I didn't know why I was keeping it. I told myself it was just so I could do my taxes properly, or track what I'd loaned versus given, or keep my own records straight the way I was learning to at my first accounting internship. Looking back, I think some part of me already understood that a family that explains things to you after the fact, instead of asking you before it happens, is a family you eventually need evidence against, even if you can't yet say why. I graduated. I got my first real job, a junior title examiner position that paid less than I deserved and more than I'd ever earned before. And for the first time in years, I started actually saving instead of just surviving. I moved twice, each apartment slightly better than the last. I got promoted. I built a life that had nothing to do with my family's approval, which is, I think, the exact moment a fixer's family starts to lose its grip on her. Not when she gets angry, but when she gets independent enough that her cooperation becomes optional instead of assumed. My parents noticed that shift in their own way. The requests slowed down for a couple of years. I want to be fair and say there was a period, my early 20s, mostly, where things felt almost normal between us. Birthdays were regular birthdays. Phone calls were regular phone calls. I let myself believe, for a while, that the tuition fund had been a single bad decision in a hard year, not a preview. I want to fast forward now to where the pattern came back, bigger than ever, because that's really the story. The story is what happened 8 years after that first betrayal, when my family discovered that the girl they'd once called resourceful had turned that resourcefulness into a career and decided that made her useful to them again. Not for $500 this time, but for something with a lot more zeros and a lot more risk attached to it. Let me bring you to the present. I am 27 now. I paid off the last of my student loans 14 months ago on a Tuesday, sitting in this same apartment, and I did not tell my parents because by then I had learned that good news shared with my family had a way of turning into a request. I have a job I'm good at. I have a one-bedroom apartment on the north side with a view of absolutely nothing interesting, and I love it more than any apartment I've ever had because every square foot of it is mine, paid for with money nobody drained out from under me. Camille is 25 now. She got engaged in the spring to a man named Reed who sells commercial insurance and says, "Circle back" in normal conversation, and my parents have spent the last 4 months planning what they keep calling, without a hint of irony, Camille's second golden year. An engagement dinner so large and so elaborate that 3 separate relatives have asked me, independently, if my parents won the lottery. I should tell you, my parents did not win the lottery. My father still works the same regional sales job he's worked for 2 decades, and my mother left her part-time bookkeeping job 4 years ago to focus on the family, which mostly means focusing on Camille. Their income, by any honest accounting, has not changed enough to explain a 90-guest dinner at a converted mansion with a live quartet and a 5-tier cake. I know this not because I pry into my parents' finances out of spite, but because numbers are the language I actually speak fluently, and I cannot turn that fluency off just because it's inconvenient for the people who raised me. When something doesn't add up, I notice. I noticed with the education fund at 19. I noticed again, 8 years later, the moment my mother said the word guarantor. They did not win the lottery. I know that for a fact because 10 days ago, my mother called and asked me to be a guarantor on a $38,000 loan for what she described as wedding expenses that got a little ahead of the deposit schedule. She asked it the way she asks for everything, lightly, like it was a small favor between adults, like the number 38,000 was a rounding error instead of a sentence with weight behind it. I told her I needed to think about it. That was not a delay tactic. I genuinely did need to think, because something about the request felt familiar in a way I couldn't name yet. A low hum under the surface, the kind of feeling you get when a number doesn't add up on a spreadsheet before you can even say why. 2 days later, my grandmother Ellery called me. She is 81 now, sharp as ever, and she asked me a question that changed the entire shape of this story. She asked whether I'd gotten the papers about the house yet. "What papers, Grandma?" "The ones your mother had me sign back in the spring. Something about updating the deed information," she said. "I told her I'd want you to look them over eventually, since you understand all that better than I do." "Did she never send them to you?" I told her she had not. There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause that, over the phone, sounds exactly like someone recalculating a version of events they'd been comfortable with a moment earlier. I had no idea what papers she meant. She explained, slowly, that a few months earlier my mother had asked her to sign something related to updating the family's paperwork on the property. My grandmother still technically co-owns with my parents. The same house I grew up in, the same house my grandmother had helped my parents buy 30 years ago with money she never fully forgot she'd loaned. My grandmother, trusting her own daughter the way people trust family until they have a very specific reason not to, had signed it without reading closely. I asked her one question. "Do you still have a copy?" She did. She mailed it to me that week in a manila envelope with 3 stamps on it because she always overpays for postage. And when it arrived, I sat down at my kitchen table with my document folio open beside me, the same worn leather folio I've carried since college, and I began to read. It was a home equity line of credit application, $60,000 secured against the house. My grandmother's signature was on it, as a co-owner consenting to the lien. My father's signature was on it. And at the bottom, in a line labeled Additional Authorized Party, financial contact was a signature that was supposed to be mine. I have read thousands of signatures in my career. I know my own signature, the way I know my own handwriting from the inside. The specific hitch where the N in Nora dips slightly before it rises, a habit left over from a childhood spent practicing cursive on a kitchen table that no longer exists. The signature on that HELOC application had my name. It did not have my hitch. The N was smooth, confident, and wrong. I sat very still at my kitchen table for a long moment, the way I had sat very still on my extra-long twin bed 8 years earlier. Then I did what I always do when something doesn't add up. I started building a file. Item 1. The HELOC application itself dated 4 months earlier, with a forged signature under my name in a section that, under state law, made me a financial contact with shared liability if the loan defaulted. I did not sign this. I had never seen this document before it arrived in a manila envelope with 3 stamps on it. Item 2. A notary acknowledgement stapled to the back page, stating that all signing parties had appeared in person before a notary named Carol Denby, whose stamp and license number were printed clearly at the bottom in slightly smudged blue ink, the kind of smudge you get from a stamp pad that's been used too many times without being re-inked properly. I looked up Carol Denby's notary license in the state's public registry that same afternoon. A 5-minute search, the kind I do for work every single day, cross-referencing license numbers against county filings almost on autopilot, and found her office address. It was 11 minutes from my parents' house, tucked into a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a check-cashing storefront. The kind of office that exists specifically to notarize things quickly, for cash, without asking many questions. Item 3. A bank statement my grandmother had also enclosed, one she'd found while looking for the original loan paperwork, showing that the $60,000 HELOC had already been approved and partially drawn against. $18,000 had been withdrawn 6 weeks earlier. 6 weeks earlier was the same week my mother told a cousin, at a family barbecue, that the deposit for Camille's engagement dinner venue had finally cleared. Item 4. And this is the one that made my hands go cold in a way the first 3 hadn't. A text message my grandmother had never deleted, sent from my mother 8 days before the notary appointment. My grandmother read it to me over the phone, and I wrote it down word for word while she spoke. Nora won't mind. She's always been the practical one. We'll explain it to her after, once everything's settled. She'll understand. She always does. She'll understand. She always does. I sat with that sentence the way I once sat with the words, "You're resourceful." My family had, in writing, planned to forge my name onto a $60,000 lien against a house I don't own, spend a chunk of it before telling me, and explain it to me afterward as a formality. The exact same playbook, 8 years later, with a bigger number and an actual crime attached to it this time, instead of just a broken promise. I want to pause here, because I know some of you watching are already leaning forward, wondering what I did with that text message, that notary's name, that $18,000. Stay with me, because what happens over the next 10 days is the part of this story I've been waiting to tell you. But first, if this is resonating with you at all, if you've ever been the practical one who gets explained to after the fact instead of asked before, please subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling stories like mine, and I want you here for the part where the folder finally opens in front of everyone. Now, let me tell you what I did with 10 days. The first thing I did was not confront anyone. I know that surprises some people. My family has always mistaken my quiet for weakness, the same way they mistake a locked door for an empty room. I did not call my mother screaming. because screaming would have given her the chance to cry, to reframe, to turn my anger into the story instead of her forgery. Screaming would have made it about my tone instead of her signature. Instead, I called an attorney. Not a family friend, not someone who'd know my parents' names. A fraud attorney named Priya Ahluwalia, whose firm I'd worked adjacent to on a title dispute 2 years earlier, and whose competence I trusted the way I trust very few people. I brought her my folio. All 4 items. The application, the notary acknowledgement, the bank statement, and a printed copy of the text message, which my grandmother had forwarded to me by then in a screenshot with the timestamp still visible. Her office was on the 9th floor of a building 2 blocks from mine, small and unglamorous, with a single window that looked out over a parking structure instead of a skyline. I remember thinking, sitting across from her desk with my folio open in my lap, that I liked her office precisely because it wasn't trying to impress anyone. Neither was I. Priya read through everything twice without saying a word, which is a habit I recognized in her immediately, because it's my own habit too. She traced her finger along the signature line on the HELOC application, then pulled a real signature of mine from a notarized document I'd brought as comparison. An old apartment lease, and set the 2 side by side under her desk lamp. "The end doesn't hitch," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Yours does. Every single time." I told her that was the first thing I'd noticed too, sitting at my kitchen table 3 days earlier, and something in her expression told me she already believed the rest of what I was about to say before I said it. Then she looked up and said, "This isn't just a family disagreement, Nora. This is loan, fraud, and forgery, and depending on how the notary handled the acknowledgement, it may be notary fraud as well. You have 3 separate paths here, and you can use more than one. She laid them out for me like a menu, and I'm going to lay them out for you the way she laid them out for me, because I think it matters that this wasn't about revenge. It was about mechanisms. Path 1. Report the forged signature to the bank's fraud department directly, which would freeze further disbursement of the HELOC and trigger an internal investigation. Path 2. File a complaint with the State Notary Regulatory Office against Carol Denby, since notarizing a document without the actual party present, if that's what happened, is itself a licensing violation with real consequences. Path 3. Have Priya draft a formal cease and desist and demand letter, putting my parents on written notice that I had not authorized the signature, that I held them responsible for the $18,000 already drawn, and that continued use of my name on any financial instrument would result in a police report for identity fraud. I chose all 3, quietly. Over the following 6 days, while my mother texted me twice about seating charts for Saturday's dinner, as if nothing in the world was wrong, the bank's fraud department moved faster than I expected. Within 4 days, a case manager named Trevor Okafor called me directly, his voice careful and procedural in a way I recognized immediately. The same tone I use with clients when I have to tell them a title isn't as clean as they hoped. "Miss Voss, I want to walk you through what we found," he said, and then he did, methodically, the way I would have done it myself. He confirmed that the signature on the additional authorized party line did not match any signature on file for me, not from my driver's license, not from a prior account I'd once held with the same bank years earlier, and that the account had been flagged pending a full identity verification review. He told me something else, too, something Priya had warned me might happen. Because the loan had already been partially dispersed and flagged as disputed, the bank had the authority to freeze the remaining undrawn balance immediately and to place a hold on the account until the investigation concluded. $42,000, the exact amount still sitting undrawn in that line of credit, was about to become completely inaccessible. Saturday, I learned from Trevor, almost as an aside, was the deadline my mother had listed on the loan's internal disbursement request as the date she needed the next draw finalized, to cover, in her own words on the form, final vendor balances due day of. I want you to notice that number for a second. 42,000. The exact figure my father once said out loud, proudly, at a kitchen table 8 years ago, describing what Camille's 18th birthday had cost. I don't think my parents chose that number on purpose this time. I think it's simply the number their taste always lands on, when the money isn't theirs to begin with. The notary complaint took a little longer to process, but Priya received a preliminary response by Thursday. Carol Denby's office had no appointment record, no sign-in log entry, and no photo ID copy on file for a signer named Nora Voss on the date in question. All things state law requires a notary to retain. Whatever had happened in that office, I had not been in the room for it. By Friday afternoon, Priya's cease and desist letter was ready. She asked me how I wanted it delivered. I could have it mailed, quietly, arriving sometime the following week after Saturday's dinner had already come and gone. Or, she said, watching me carefully, I could have it hand-delivered by a process server, in person, at a time and place of my choosing. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone 8 years earlier. You're resourceful. I thought about the text message she never expected my grandmother to keep. She'll understand. She always does. I told Priya Saturday. I told her 6:30 in the evening. I told her the Wentworth room at the Holloway estate. Table 1, directly in front of 90 guests. 4 minutes after my mother would inevitably stand up with a champagne glass in her hand to make her toast about family and sacrifice, because my mother always makes that toast, and she is nothing if not predictable. Priya asked if I was certain. I told her I had never been more certain of anything in my life, and my voice, when I said it, did not shake at all. I packed my folio that Friday night the way some people pack for a trip. The HELOC application, the notary complaint acknowledgement, the bank's fraud hold confirmation letter, printed, my grandmother's forwarded text message screenshot, printed, and a copy of Priya's letter, sealed, addressed to Walter and Denise Voss, with a second copy already in the hands of a process server named Marcus, who had done this kind of work for Priya's firm for 6 years and had, in his own words, seen every version of this dinner before. I did not sleep well that night. I want to be honest about that, because I think it's important you know that composure isn't the same thing as feeling nothing. I felt everything. I just didn't let any of it drive the car. Saturday arrived the way ticking clock days always do, too slowly in the morning and then all at once by evening. The Holloway estate was exactly what I expected. A converted mansion at the end of a long gravel drive lined with lanterns, a ballroom called the Wentworth Room with a vaulted ceiling and dark wood beams, string lights threaded through the rafters in careful loops, a string quartet warming up in the corner near a 5-tier cake stand still waiting for its cake, and 90 place settings arranged around round tables draped in ivory linen, each centerpiece. A low arrangement of white roses and gold-dipped eucalyptus that probably cost more than my first month's rent out of college. My mother had gone with a gold and ivory, timeless elegance theme, according to the printed menu card at my seat, which also informed me that dinner would be a 3-course plated meal and that the bar was, in her words, open all evening on us. On us. I thought about the bank's fraud hold, sitting quietly on $42,000 that was never theirs to spend, and I did not smile, but something in my chest settled anyway. I found my seat at table 1, the family table, between my grandmother Ellery, who caught my eye across the linen and gave me a small, knowing nod, and an empty chair reserved for my father, who was making rounds greeting guests with the particular warmth he reserves for rooms full of witnesses. Camille sat across from me in a champagne-colored dress, glowing in the specific way brides-to-be glow when they have not yet learned what their engagement dinner actually cost or who it was quietly billed to. My folio sat in my lap under the table, closed, waiting. Dinner moved through its courses. Small talk moved with it. Reed's aunt asking about my job, a second cousin asking if I was seeing anyone, my mother drifting by the table twice to squeeze my shoulder and say, both times, "Thank you for being here, Nora. You know how we do things. We take care of our own." Twice in one evening. I did not respond either time. I simply watched the clock on my phone, face down beside my water glass, count towards 6:30. At 6:28, my mother rose from her seat at the head of the table, tapped a spoon lightly against her champagne glass, and the room settled into the particular hush that follows that sound. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about watching Camille grow from a little girl into the kind of woman who deserves every beautiful thing in this room tonight. She said the word sacrifice, the way she always does, with a small catch in her voice that used to move me, back before I understood how selectively she applied it. And then she said it. The sentence I'd been waiting an entire dinner to hear. This family has always taken care of our own. Tonight is proof of that. At 6:31, exactly as she lowered her glass to begin the applause, a man in a plain gray suit approached the head of the table. He was calm, unhurried, the way people are when a task is simply routine to them. He asked, politely, whether he was addressing Walter and Denise Voss. My father, still standing near the edge of the room, said yes, confused, already reaching to shake a hand that wasn't extended to him. Marcus did not shake it. He held out 2 sealed envelopes instead, one for each of them, and said, clearly enough for the surrounding tables to hear, "You've been served." The room did not go silent all at once. It went silent in a wave, table by table, the way a held breath spreads outward from its source. My mother's champagne glass stayed lifted for a second too long, then came down slowly, untouched. I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I opened my folio. "I need everyone to know," I said, "that the money paying for tonight includes $18,000 drawn against a $60,000 home equity line taken out against my grandmother's house. That line of credit lists me as an additional authorized party, with a signature that isn't mine, notarized by someone who has no record of me ever being in her office." I set the HELOC application on the white linen where the cake was meant to go. The bank has already frozen the remaining $42,000 pending a fraud investigation. That's the exact amount you'd have needed for tonight's final vendor balances. It isn't coming. My mother's face did something I had genuinely never seen it do before. Not anger, not tears, just a kind of blank arithmetic, as if she were trying to recalculate a total that had just changed underneath her. My father found his voice first, low and urgent. "Nora, this isn't the place." "It's exactly the place," I said. And I want you to hear how quiet that sentence was, because it was the quietest thing I said all night. "You forged my name onto a lien 4 months ago and told my grandmother it was a paperwork update. You planned to explain it to me after it was done, the same way you explained draining my tuition fund after Camille's party was already paid for. I have the text message where you say I won't mind. I have the notary complaint. I have the bank's fraud hold in writing. I'm not here to ruin Camille's night. I'm here because you built tonight on a document with my name forged onto it, and I am done finding that out after the fact." Camille, across the table, had gone very still, one hand frozen halfway to her water glass, looking between her mother and the papers on the linen like she was seeing both for the first time. "Mom," she said, quietly, in a voice I'd never heard her use with our mother before, "is that true?" My mother did not answer her. That silence, more than anything I'd said, seemed to be the moment my sister's face actually changed. In a way, she was seeing both of them for the first time. There was no scene after that. No shouting match, no thrown wine glass, none of the things you might picture. My mother sat down, slowly, holding an unopened envelope in a hand that had lost its steadiness. My father stood exactly where he was, staring at the second envelope like it might change its contents if he waited long enough. The quartet, unsure what else to do, quietly kept playing. I closed my folio. I sat back down beside my grandmother, who reached over and squeezed my hand once, firmly, the way she used to when I was small and had done something right without being told to. And I let the silence in that room do the rest of the work I no longer had to do myself. The rest of that night unraveled in ways nobody at that table could control anymore, least of all my mother. About 10 minutes after Marcus left, while the room was still buzzing in low, uncertain whispers, the catering coordinator approached my father at the head table, holding a small leather booklet the way waitstaff do when a check is coming due. She said, quietly enough that only our table could hear, that the final balance for the evening, bar service, the extended photography package, and a change fee for an added dessert course, needed to be settled before the venue could continue service past 8 o'clock, per the contract. My father, flustered, pulled out the card he'd apparently been planning to use, the same card tied to the now frozen HELOC account, and handed it over without thinking. 5 minutes later, the coordinator returned, apologetic, and said the card had been declined. My father tried it twice more, the way people do when they think a machine is simply having a bad night, instead of understanding a bank has already made a decision for them. It declined a third time, in front of a coordinator who had started to look genuinely uncomfortable, and in earshot of the 2 closest tables, which included Reed's parents, who I noticed exchanging a glance I will remember for a long time. My mother did not finish her toast. She sat with the 2 sealed envelopes in her lap for the rest of the evening, unopened, as though not opening them might slow down whatever was already in motion. Camille left the head table at one point and disappeared toward the coach room. I found out later she'd gone to cry in private. Not from embarrassment exactly, she told me afterward, but from the sudden, dislocating feeling of realizing the night that was supposed to be about her had actually never really been about her at all. Guests began leaving earlier than planned, the way people do at a party that has quietly stopped being a party, murmuring polite excuses about babysitters and early mornings. The band played through 2 more songs to a half-empty room before someone, I never found out who, quietly asked them to wrap early. I did not gloat. I want to say that clearly, because I know some people watching might expect a moment of triumph, a smug little smile across the table. I felt something closer to grief, honestly. For the version of this family I'd spent years hoping still existed underneath all of this, and for the version of Saturday that could have simply been a nice dinner, if a forged signature and a family motto hadn't been sitting underneath it the entire time. I finished my water. I thanked the 2 guests near me for coming. And when my grandmother asked, quietly, if I wanted a ride home instead of waiting around, I said yes, and we left together before dessert was ever served. I want to tell you what happened after Saturday, because the real consequences, the ones that actually mattered, didn't happen in that ballroom. They happened over the following 10 weeks, in a series of quiet, procedural moments that added up to something my family could not talk their way out of. 3 days later, the bank's investigation confirmed what Priya and I already knew. The signature was forged, the notarization was invalid, and my parents were formally responsible for the full $18,000 already disbursed, plus applicable fees, with the remaining $42,000 permanently canceled rather than released. The bank additionally flagged the account for a mandatory review of my parents' existing mortgage, since the same property now carried a documented fraud incident on file, a review that ultimately required my grandmother, as co-owner, to personally re-verify her ownership stake and update the deed records to reflect her as sole authorizing party for any future lien against the house, effectively closing the exact loophole my mother had used to get her signature in the first place. 2 weeks after that, the State Notary Regulatory Board suspended Carol Denby's license pending a full hearing after confirming she had no appointment record, no signature log, and no identification copy for the transaction. A violation serious enough, her supervisor later told Priya's office that criminal referral was under active consideration. I never learned exactly what arrangement existed between her and my parents, whether it was a favor, a shortcut, or something that changed hands in a form I'll never see on paper. I didn't need to know. The forgery was enough on its own. My father was the one who called me, 11 days after the dinner, not to apologize, not exactly, but to ask whether I intended to pursue criminal charges for the forgery itself. Your mother didn't think it through, he said, which was as close as he came to naming what had actually happened. She just wanted the night to be perfect for Camille. You know how she gets. I know how she gets, I agreed. I also know how a forged signature works, Dad. Both things are true at the same time. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question directly. Are you going to press charges? I told him the truth. I hadn't decided yet, and that decision would depend entirely on whether the $18,000 was repaid in full on a schedule Priya's office would set, with no further requests for money from me in any form, ever, as a condition of my not pursuing it. He agreed before I finished the sentence. It's the fastest my father has ever agreed to anything in my life. Camille's wedding, which had been quietly folded into the engagement dinner planning before it even had a date, was postponed indefinitely. Not because of me, because the deposits my parents had been counting on, deposits that traced back to a loan that no longer existed, evaporated along with the frozen $42,000. Reed, to his credit, told Camille he didn't care about the size of the wedding, only about marrying her. My sister called me about a month after the dinner, and instead of asking me for anything, for the first time I can remember, she asked me a question. Did you know? About my birthday? All this time? I told her the truth. I told her I'd known the money came from somewhere it shouldn't have, but I'd never told her, because I didn't want her to spend her 18th birthday knowing what it had cost someone else. She was quiet for a long time on the phone. Then she said something I did not expect. I'm sorry, Nora. I don't think I ever really asked how you paid for school. It wasn't a large apology. It wasn't even a complete one. But it was the first honest sentence my sister had said to me about any of this in 8 years, and I let it be enough for that day. My mother has not apologized. Not once, not fully, not in the specific way I might have once needed her to. What she did instead, about 6 weeks after the dinner, was mail me a check for $2,000 with a note that said, "A start. We take care of our own." I want you to notice that she used the phrase one more time, even in writing, even after everything, Because some people don't abandon a script just because it's been exposed. They just keep performing it for a smaller audience. I deposited the check. I did not write back. I want to be clear about something, because I know the version of this story you might be expecting ends with a screaming match, a permanent estrangement, a door slammed so hard the whole family hears it. That's not what happened, and I think that's actually the more useful ending to tell you about, because most of us don't get the dramatic clean break. We get the slow, deliberate work of deciding what a relationship is allowed to cost us going forward. I did reconcile, eventually, but only with the two people in my family who earned it, and only on terms I set myself, not terms handed to me the way "we take care of our own" was always handed to me. The first was my grandmother. About 2 months after the dinner, she asked me to come stay with her for a weekend, just the two of us, no parents, no Camille. We sat on her back porch with 2 cups of coffee, mine black, the way I've taken it since college, watching her garden go gold at the edges the way gardens do in early autumn, and she told me something I hadn't known, that she'd questioned, quietly, more than once over the years, where the education money had actually gone, but had never had the proof to challenge her own daughter directly. Denise always had an answer ready, she said, turning her mug slowly in her hands. Every time I brought it up, gently, she had a reason. I told myself I was being an interfering old woman. I wasn't. I was being lied to by someone I raised to know better. I told her she didn't owe me an apology for trusting her own daughter. She looked at me for a long moment and said, "I should have asked harder questions. I'm asking them now." She has since moved the remaining balance of any future gifts into a trust with an independent trustee, not my mother, and she told me plainly, setting her mug down on the porch railing, that she trusts my judgment on financial matters more than anyone else's in the family, mine included when I doubt myself. That relationship I chose to rebuild, slowly, on my own schedule, because she had never once, in 8 years, asked me to explain away what happened to me. She had only ever asked how to make it right. The second was Camille. It took longer with her, and it's still not finished, if I'm honest. But about 4 months after the dinner, she called and asked if she could come to my apartment, alone, and I said yes. She sat on my couch and told me she'd spent weeks going back through old photos from her 18th birthday, really looking at them for the first time, the ice sculpture, the car, the dress, and feeling sick every time, because she said she finally understood that none of it had been free. It had just been unpaid by the people who threw the party. She asked if she could help pay some of it back, not the forged HELOC money, which was never her debt to carry, but the original tuition fund, the $31,000 in loans I'd taken out at 19. I told her I didn't need her money. What I needed, I told her, was for her to stop assuming, the way our parents had trained her to, that my competence meant my needs didn't count. "You always seemed like you had it handled," she said, almost pleading, like that was an explanation instead of just a description. "That's exactly the problem," I told her. "I did have it handled. That's not the same thing as it being fair." She sat with that for a long moment before she nodded, slowly, like she was actually turning it over instead of just waiting for the conversation to end. She's been trying since then, calling more, asking questions instead of assuming answers. Trying is not the same as arriving, but it's more honesty than I had from her in the 8 years before it. My parents are a different matter, and I want to be honest that this part of the story doesn't have a bow on it. My father repaid the $18,000 in full on the schedule Priya set in 9 installments, the last of which cleared 4 weeks ago. I did not pursue criminal charges for the forgery, not out of forgiveness exactly, but because the repayment, the notary's suspended license, and the frozen $42,000 felt, together, like consequences that actually meant something in a way a courtroom might not have added much to. My mother still calls sometimes. The conversations are shorter now, and careful on both sides, and she has never once said the words, "I forged your name," even in private, even to me alone. She has said, more than once, "I know things got out of hand." That is the closest thing to an apology I expect, I will ever get from her, and I have made my peace with that being the ceiling, not the floor, of what our relationship can be going forward. Word traveled through the rest of the family the way it always does, unevenly, in fragments, filtered through whoever felt most entitled to tell it first. An aunt texted me a week after the dinner, asking if it was really true that I'd had my own parents served at Camille's engagement party, in a tone that made it clear she already believed it was true and mostly wanted the details. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years sent a message that simply said, "Good for you, honestly," which surprised me more than almost anything else that happened that month. I didn't respond to most of them. I had already said everything I needed to say, once, in a ballroom, with documents instead of gossip, and I didn't feel any need to narrate it a second time for an audience that hadn't been in the room. I went back to work that Monday like nothing had happened, because in the part of my life that actually belongs to me, nothing had. I sat at my desk on the 17th floor, opened a new title file for a property closing that had nothing to do with my family, and read through a chain of ownership going back to 1962, checking for exactly the kind of inconsistency I'd spent the weekend hunting down in my own life. There is something steadying about that kind of work, I've found. The reminder that documents, unlike people, don't change their story depending on who's in the room. A deed says what it says. A signature either matches or it doesn't. I have built an entire career on that certainty, and for the first time, that Monday, I understood clearly why I'd chosen it. Somewhere underneath the accounting degree and the title exams, a 19-year-old girl in a dorm room had decided, without fully knowing it yet, that she wanted a life built on things that couldn't be quietly rewritten after the fact. Here's what I learned, and I want to say this directly to you, because I have a feeling some of you already know exactly what I'm about to say before I say it. Families like mine don't usually announce what they're doing to you. They don't sit you down and say, plainly, "We're going to spend your future on someone else's party," and then explain it to you afterward as if it were always fair. Instead, they build a language around it. They give it a phrase that sounds like warmth instead of what it actually is. In my family, that phrase was, "We take care of our own." I heard it at 19, standing at a kitchen table doing math I didn't want to do. I heard it at 27, in a text message my mother never expected anyone else to read. I heard it a third time, from her own mouth, over the linen of a table she'd built with money that had my forged name on it. 3 times, at minimum, across 8 years, the exact same sentence, doing the exact same job, turning a bill into a blessing and turning my hesitation into the thing that needed explaining instead of their behavior. If there is one thing I want you to take from this, it's this. Pay attention to the phrase your family reaches for right before they ask you for something. Not the big, obvious asks. Those are easy to spot. I mean the soft ones, the ones wrapped in a value you already believe in. Loyalty, sacrifice, family, love. Those are the ones that get you, because you don't want to be the person who says no to loyalty. I didn't, for a long time. It took me until I was 19, sitting alone in a dorm room with a financial hold in red letters on my screen, to understand that a family can use the language of love to describe something that has nothing to do with it. I also want to say something about competence, because I think it gets misunderstood in stories like this one. People sometimes hear quiet, procedural justice and assume it means passive or cold, or that I simply outsmarted my family with paperwork the way you'd win a board game. That's not what this was. Every document in my folio existed because, for 8 years, some quiet part of me refused to let my own history be rewritten by people who were counting on me not to keep records. Competence, in a family like mine, isn't a personality trait. It's a survival skill you build one receipt, one screenshot, one calmly worded question at a time, usually without even realizing that's what you're doing, until the day it matters more than you ever expected it to. I think about that 19-year-old girl a lot, the one on the extra-long twin bed with the space heater humming in the corner. She didn't know, that night, that the blank document she opened on her laptop, the one where she typed 2 dates and 3 words, "before the party," was the first entry in a file that would eventually take down a forged signature, suspend a notary's license, and freeze $42,000 4 minutes before a toast. She just knew something didn't add up, and she wrote it down anyway, because that was the only power she had left in that moment. It turned out to be enough. It usually is if you're patient enough to let the record grow. I don't think my parents are monsters. I want to be honest about that too, because I think stories like this one sometimes flatten people into villains when the truth is messier and, frankly, sadder. I think my parents genuinely believe, on some level, that they were simply doing what parents do. Prioritizing one child's big moment, trusting that the other child, the resourceful one, the practical one, would absorb the cost without complaint, because she always had before. I think my mother, in particular, grew up in a household where money was scarce and appearances mattered enormously. And I think some unhealed part of her has spent her whole adult life trying to give Camille the kind of golden, effortless childhood she never had herself, without ever quite noticing that she was funding it by quietly withdrawing from someone else's account, literal and otherwise. That belief doesn't make what they did less serious. Forgery is forgery, whether the person doing it loves you or not, and a debt built on someone else's name is still a debt, no matter how good the intentions behind it felt to the person who created it. But understanding why they did it has helped me let go of needing them to become different people entirely. I don't need my mother to become someone who never says we take care of our own again. I need her to understand that the sentence has a price tag now, and that price tag is that she doesn't get to spend my name, my credit, or my trust without asking me first, ever again. If you're watching this and some part of it sounds familiar, if you've ever been the sibling who gets the bill instead of the toast, the one who's told you're so mature about this as a way of skipping the apology entirely, I want you to hear this clearly. You are allowed to keep records. You are allowed to ask, calmly, where the money came from. You are allowed to bring a folder to a family dinner if that's what it takes for the truth to finally sit on the table where everyone can see it. You do not have to scream to be believed. Sometimes the quietest sentence in the room is the one that actually changes everything. And mine, on Saturday, was 11 words long. You forged my name onto a lien 4 months ago. That's the whole lesson, really. Not that paperwork beats love. Paperwork was never competing with love in my family. It was competing with a story my parents needed to keep telling themselves, and themselves alone, about what kind of family we were. The documents didn't break that story. They just made it impossible to keep telling it in a room full of witnesses. I still carry the same folio. It's a little more cracked at the corners now than it was that Saturday night, and I've had to reinforce one of the seams with a strip of clear tape that I keep meaning to replace properly and never do. My coworkers still tease me about it. I keep it anyway, the way some people keep a scar they've stopped resenting. Not because I need to prove anything to my family anymore, but because it reminds me of something I want to hold on to. That the version of me who sat very still on an extra long twin bed at 19, absorbing the words, "you're resourceful," instead of an apology, was building something that whole time, even when it didn't feel like it. She wasn't just surviving. She was quietly becoming someone whose name, whose signature, whose word would eventually be too well documented to erase. Camille's wedding, by the way, is back on. Smaller now, self-funded, sometime next spring, and she asked me last week if I'd help her go through vendor contracts before she signs anything, just to make sure everything's actually what it says it is. I said yes. Some things, it turns out, really do come full circle, just not in the direction anyone expected at that dinner table 8 years ago. If any part of this story felt familiar to you, if you've ever been the one who pays quietly while someone else gets the toast, the one who's told you're too sensible to mind, I want you to know that keeping records isn't cold, and it isn't disloyal. It's just the truth, waiting patiently in a folder for the day it finally needs to speak louder than you do. I'd love to know what you would have done in that ballroom. Would you have opened the folio the way I did, right there at the table? Or would you have waited for a quieter moment? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and some of your stories over the years have honestly been harder to sit with than my own. If this story meant something to you, share it with the person in your life who's always the one fixing things, the one everyone assumes will understand. She might need to hear that she's allowed to stop understanding quite so easily. And if you're new here, welcome. This is Calm Karma Stories, where the quiet ones win, not with volume, but with proof. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, hit the bell so you don't miss the next one, and I will see you in the next one.